Okay, it's recording. Um, so, oh, wait. I'm also admitting newcomers. Okay, let me make the introduction. Today we have Başak Yavcan with us. Thank you for coming. And make a short introduction about Başak Hoca. She is a senior researcher at the Hugo Observatory of Environment, Migration and Politics in the University of Liège, and an associate professor of political science and international relations at Top University. And also she leads an interdisciplinary graduate program on migration studies. She holds a PhD from the University of Pittsburgh and also a PhD from University of Michigan. And let's she's research focuses on intergroup relations and public opinion, in particular regarding refugee integration and impact of immigration attitudes on Euroscepticism, immigrant acceleration attitudes, and impacts of media framing on public opinion. Lately, she has been working on integration of Syrian refugees in Turkey, and at the Hugo Observatory, she works on the structural and environmental determinants of migratory crisis. Also, today's topic is environmental drivers of displacement. So I'm moving to the talk and giving you the floor. Başak Hocam, floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. It's a great honor to join you today. I would like to send my condolences to all of the METU community for this deep, important loss, the much beloved ex-rector of the university. Today, Başak Hoca could not be with us, so we thought the best thing would be to have another Başak Hoca with you today. There was a joke on Twitter at one point that if you want to study migration in Turkey, you should be a woman and your name should be Başak in Turkey. So that's, I guess it does come from us, but we're happy to create this reputation, and we're happy that one area is now, at least called by women, framed by women in a way. I have several appointments, and I was probably, it was confusing for you as well, but I did receive my PhD from University of Pittsburgh. I did not receive another PhD. That's your other Başak Hoca who has 2 PhDs. I have just one. And I did though work at several different institutions, Northwestern University or University of Michigan being, or New York University being some of them. So right now I am at Hugo Observatory of Migration Governance at the University of Liège. And we are a research center committed to the study of the interactions between environmental changes and human migration and politics. And here we conduct both theoretical and empirical field research. And today, much of what I will be talking about will be from the work generated at the center, especially by the director of the center, François Gemen, and the deputy director, Caroline Zikraft. So I'll be heavily citing our conversations, their work, and recently the work that I have been doing at the center. So environmental migrants is probably a new thing that you've heard, and you're curious as to what it means and what it entails. So it does entail a lot of things, but let's start with definitions, because we do have several definitions of that try to refer to same concept, but calling it different things has different implications. So when we say environmental migrants, we mean that these are people, these are persons of groups who predominantly for reasons of sudden or progressive change in the environment, which we will go deeper what the sudden change is or what a progressive change, a slow change is. So for reasons of sudden or progressive change in the environment that adversely affects their lives or living conditions, are obliged to leave their habitual homes or choose to do so. So either obliged or choose to do so, either temporarily or permanently, and who move either within their country or abroad. So in this case, we use the term, we use the environmental displacement in a way. These, we call them migrants. This is, by the way, the IOM definition. But the displacement could be internal or external, which is important differentiation to make here. And here we're talking about either the slow onset changes or rapid onset changes. This rapid ones, the sudden changes could be disasters really, but there are other reasons such as droughts, desertification, sea level rise that come with temperature increases, and that's really the global warming. So when we say the slow onset changes, we really refer to the slow process through which the environment that the people live in becomes inhabitable or hard to live in. But there could be some anthropogenic reasons for this as well. While the environment is being getting more difficult to live in, people contribute to this as well. And because we do not take precaution in the way we produce energy and use energy predominantly, in the way that we manage production, agricultural production, as well as industrial production. So here we're really, and also Saskia Sassen talks about the issue with developmental issues in the really lesser developed parts of the world, and how this not good focus on the right kind of development, sustainable development, is also contributing to this environmental migration. Clearly, my cats want to be part of this conversation too. They are called Simit and Gevrek. Shh. Thank God they listen to me, but only for a couple of minutes. So we'll come back to meowing. That is environmental migration in a nutshell. If we were to translate it, why did I define it so vehemently, like emphasize this so much? Because if you were to Google it and look for the Turkish term, what does the Wikipedia say for the Turkish term? Please do use the chat box as freely as you want. You can, by the way, throughout this conversation, you can ask me questions and everything. I'm usually good at following, multitasking. Ne dedi Google? Ne dedi Wikipedia? What does Wikipedia say about the Turkish term for environmental migration? In parentheses. Because that'll bring us to a big debate. That's why I'm asking.
İklim göçü, maybe.
Ekolojik mültecilik geldi Aslıhan'dan önce, ardından Oğuz'dan. Okay. So ekolojik mültecilik diye bir şey diyor. So that's kind of an issue because that's environmental refugee, climate refugee. That's a different term, right? Actually, iklim göçmenliği or çevre göçmenliği daha doğru bir kalıp. Because when we're talking about environmental migration, overall, as scholars, we try to be as all-encompassing as we can to include all kinds of different people who are affected by environmental change. But when you say ecological refugees or environmental climate refugees, you're trying to be very strict in your definition, putting these people in a very small pigeonhole, which is very hard with environmental drivers. And I will get to why very soon. But let's talk about numbers, something that we're very cautious about as people who are studying on environmental migration, because it's very difficult to talk about numbers. So I did talk about the slow onset changes and the rapid onset changes. The reliable numbers are the ones about rapid onset changes, sudden onset, like disasters, because they are counted, they are calculated, the records are kept. So reliable numbers for this are every year about 25 million people are forcibly displaced, if you may, by disasters. Okay, that's a huge number. But a majority of this are internal migrants. That doesn't mean they will not become external migrants, but they're internal. And also, while we know about 25 million people are displaced because of disasters, what we don't know is how long they are displaced for. And case studies conducted in this area usually show that the people who are displaced because of disasters usually tend to or want to more to come back to their area if the origin is now a livable place after a certain time. Now that brings us to the idea of resilience, right? How resilient are the cities? How resilient are the countries, the towns to the effects of these disasters? And when a big disaster takes place in the developed world, like Hurricane Katrina, etc., because these countries have high preparedness, high resilience, they are good at disaster emergency management, they are good at addressing the vulnerabilities of this population that is affected by disaster. And they're very good at also organizing the returns and restructuring of these areas with construction projects, with social aid, etc. So, but when it happens in the developing world, which is the case more often than not, and when we're talking about this, we're talking about the whole world, but in a lesser developed country, this resilience of the cities, of the countries is lower and putting people in a much more vulnerable situation. So that is with disasters, we can talk about numbers. With the rest, the climate change, it's really difficult to talk about numbers. Why? Because of the impact of environment on displacement. How does the link work? How do you think it works? What are your thoughts? How do you think environment, let's say climate change in particular, affects displacement, leads to displacement? How does the causal mechanism work?
As far as I know, the world's livable places is decreasing as a result of climate change in general. So the unlivable and habitable places increases, and this leads to displacements in a general sense, as I can say.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
Also the trapped water resources.
Okay.
And that results the migration.
Okay, so here we have water resources as a trigger, as a driver for migration. Let's maybe take a step back and remember other drivers of migration. You know, I'm sure you've gone over this, like the entire theories of push factors, pull factors with regards to migration, right? What kind of general theories do you have? What are determinants, drivers of migration? That's some of the work I'm doing for Hugo Observatory here is also relates to this amalgamation of different drivers. First, we have the structural drivers, right? Among the structural drivers, we can talk about the economic differences. We can talk about geography as well, but mainly wage differentials, right? More like if you think you'll have a better life someplace else, there are these kind of wage differentials between the countries are a major push factor for migration. You can have different theories, you can have network theories or the household level decision-making of diversifying risk, etc. But that's the gist of the story. So here we have this important variable that people look at, that is economic development, GDP growth. And how do you think it affects migration? What do you think is the relationship between GDP growth, GDP rates across the world and migration?
The people migrate from the lower GDP areas to the higher GDP areas because of increase their life standards and gain more money. Maybe we can easily say that.
Okay, that's the assumption, but it is not entirely true. Their assumption is there would be linear relationship, or like this, between GDP and migration, right? So this being migration, or this being migration, this being GDP, like lower levels with higher migration. But it's more complicated than that. Why am I talking about GDP? Because the way environment affects migration is not always direct, and sometimes through these different drivers. That's why I wanted to take a step back. So the very poor. So low income countries. So there is, yes, you're right that there is more migration from low income countries to higher income countries. That's the assumption. But at the same time, when you are the poorest of the poor in a low income country, you do not have most likely you do not have the resources to migrate. What resources are we talking about? You need to have information. You need to have a degree which would serve you well, finding a job elsewhere. You may not know the language of this other country. You may not have the money to move. I mean, even if it's a completely regular move, legal move, you need money for this. You may not have the connections. You may not have the money to pay the smugglers if it's not a regular move, right? So actually the people who migrate are not the poorest of the poor. Those are the most vulnerable who stay behind also after disasters, also because of while all of these climate change is taking place. So actually we should really worry about those people as well who are left behind. But for higher rates, you are right that as GDP increases, migration decreases, right? That's the idea of a macro level wage differentials theory. You know, the supply and demand will come to an equilibrium. However, that's why we don't say it's a linear relationship. We say it's a reverse U-shaped non-linear relationship between GDP and migration. So at very high and very low levels of GDP, you don't have much migration, but in between, yes, there is a strong relationship. So most of the migration actually takes place from the middle income countries to the high income, or lower middle to the middle and higher income. We need to also remember though, with the migration of these, with the climate migration, a lot of this is very regional. So we're talking about temperature increases and droughts, especially something that would especially impact the livelihoods of populations reliant on agriculture. And guess what? It's a big percentage big part of the population in the world. So all of this reliance, so many of us are actually making a living through agriculture and in the world, and that is actually making us very dependent on the environmental factors. So and we're mainly talking about many areas in Africa, but also South and Southeast Asia at this point. There is this, when we're talking about this specific impact, usually studies show that temperature increases as a result of climate change are most likely to lead to migration as a direct impact above 24 degrees Celsius. So the more temperature increases above 24 degrees Celsius, the more migration that is likely to bring, making the areas where these people live inhabitable. Part of the reason for this inhabitability is the sea level rises that are also related to, of course, temperature increases. So usually the islands that are referred in relation to this are the Vanuatu and the Pacific Islands, where we see the coast of devastating natural disasters. With some names, maybe you've heard of Kiribati, Cook Islands, Fiji, Tuvalu, Solomon Islands, Micronesia. Kiribati is a good one because, as you know, in 2020 in January in New Zealand, an important decision was made by a UN panel on refugees, saying that people fleeing the effects of the climate change, as the one in Kiribati, should not be returned back home. So New Zealand was not allowed to force this person who was fleeing to New Zealand from Kiribati to go back, because while he will not be killed by an army, eventually he'll have no land to live on. These are the Southeastern, the Pacific, Southeastern Asia are important examples because we see a lot of action going on also in Kiribati, also in Maldives. For instance, in Maldives, many of the population in the side islands were removed and resettled at the main islands. In Kiribati, they are doing these projects of increasing the education and occupational competitivity of the inhabitants to allow them to sponsor their migration, actually. So they're helping people to migrate from households as a coping mechanism. So here what we see is migration as adaptation. Okay, so I'm going in and out of topics a bit. I'm sorry for this, but I think otherwise it's kind of dull to talk about, okay, this leads to migration, this leads to environmental migration, and this doesn't. So, okay, so at the end of the day then, we're talking about direct effect of environmental factors and slow onset changes in particular, and we're talking about indirect impacts. So indirect, again, there is a high direct impact of climate change above 24 degrees Celsius, leading to increase, but that leads to increases in internal migration decision or internal migration, which we can see in a statistically significant way. Why I keep talking about this, we have case studies, but when we look at the studies that look at the entire world, we want to see the numbers. We want them to give us some statistical significance to show a direct impact. So many scholars, as we said, point out to the indirect effects, particularly through the livelihoods. And actually, if you ask people in these areas where climate change is affecting their lives heavily in many areas, they will tell you it's because of the economic conditions they are migrating. Where in fact, the triggers of these economic difficulties are the environmental drivers. So there is this, intertwinedness between the two concepts. That's why I wanted to talk about wage differentials, the impact of GDP, and how that plays into migration. So, for instance, in a study that tries to project the 2080 climate change, in Mexico, in the case of Mexico, they show that through its effect on agricultural productivity, temperature increases may lead to an additional out-migration of 2 to 10% of the current working age population in Mexico. So again, in an analysis of 163 countries, they find that many scholars for the 1980 to 2010 find a statistically significant effect of temperatures on outflows in mostly agriculture dependent countries. So here we're looking for this kind of combination in a way. With regards to, again, indirect and nonlinear effect, we can say that water resources and rainfall is also important, especially in their study of international refugee flows, for instance. Abel et al. Illustrated that. Authors found that controlling for the economic conditions and political factors, conflict outbreaks are more probable in countries with scarce freshwater resources and lower level of rainfall, hence show a mediated impact of environmental change on migration. So in a way then, the most common ways for environment to have an impact on migration is through economic drivers and through conflict, we can say. That is why numbers are different. How are we to quantify climate migrants or environmental migrants, migrants that are out there for climate change? First of all, they do not identify themselves as such. They're not aware of the situation necessarily. Sometimes they are, but sometimes they're not. But at the same time, it's very hard to quantify who could be being affected by this directly or indirectly. And also the whole idea of that brings us really, are these people forced migrants? Are these people voluntary migrants? That discussion is completely futile in environmental migration because it can be forced, it can be voluntary. I mean, you could move, you could not move, you could be a fisherman in one of these islands and not move and start, I don't know, working at a shop as opposed to doing fishery, continuing to be a fisherman. But you may also want to continue to live like a fisherman to make a living through fishing. And for that, you cannot do it there anymore. You may want to move elsewhere. Okay, so is this forced voluntary? It's really hard to tell. Therefore, we're refraining from making this differentiation usually when it comes to environmental migration. That's why, you know, shall we fit this? Shall we call them climate refugees? You know, the Refugee Convention, and clearly the people who need to leave their homes due to environmental change are not qualified to be there. I mean, there are different arguments in the literature. One group says that, yes, we need to do something about the definition of refugees as stated by the UN Convention and include environmental reasons there. And another group says, no, we need to understand the mechanisms of environment, which are very closely interconnected with economics, and we need to take action accordingly. We need to, and this is a much larger phenomena, we need to give more development aid, increase the resilience of these cities, help the migrants integrate and resettle. Why is this important? Because many times these internal migrants who migrated because of environment do end up living in slums in very vulnerable positions, not in an environmentally friendly way, which may also lead them to migrate further, which we see a lot also. Okay, so let's talk about some cases that we hardly think in relation to the environment. For instance, the severe drought of 2018 in Afghanistan. It's estimated that 300,000 people have moved out of Afghanistan. And guess what? We have had a very regular flow of Afghani immigrants, irregular immigrants into Turkey, most of which were the ones who were at the border with Greece at the beginning of 2020. Yes, we didn't talk about their impact of environment, the impact of drought in relation to their migration, but in fact, it was a very important driver for them. It's estimated by UNHCR that because of environmental reasons, only in 2018, 25 people a day were forced to flee their homes. So the numbers are big, but there are maximalist and minimalist estimations, but there's also a problem with securitizing the issue with those big numbers. Oh my God, all these migrants are coming to Europe. That we see a lot, right? They're gonna come to Europe. Oh, we need to do something about it. But guess what? The global warming is taking place because of the production methods, because of the gas emissions, carbon emissions, and Simit, artık susar mısın? Evet yani bır. Sus bakayım. Geç köşene. Duymayacağım sesini. My goodness. He never meows this much. This is like, I mean, every time we are in a Zoom meeting and it's my time to talk, he starts talking. I don't know if he thinks that I'm talking to him, or maybe he's jealous that he wants me to talk to him. But on the other hand, this was exceptionally high background noise in our conversation with you. So my apologies for this. It's on recording now. You're recorded. Are you happy? Meow. Shh. Okay, so again, the whole idea, what I was trying to say is the whole idea, we need to be careful about talking about climate change with future dystopias because it's happening today. That's one thing that's wrong with giving these numbers. This is happening today. And with carbon emissions, with the production we're doing, the effects takes generations, 1 or 2 generations, which is what makes it difficult to act today. Because guess what? Politicians are short-sighted. Right? So why should we take precautions for something that's not only, I mean, forget politicians, forget us. This is not affecting me. This is not affecting my children, maybe grandchildren. So like from where we stand. So the emissions we produce today their effect are there in 2 generations, but they're affecting people elsewhere as we speak right now. So a lot of the environmental challenges related to climate change in developing world is because of the production in the north, right? Because of the pollution in the north. So, but that's not the entire story. As I said, there is also a lot of Anthropocenic parts of the story. Right? What could they be? All of this development that is not responsible or sustainable may lead to this. So, for instance, I mean, there could be an interaction with global warming and the reactions. So, for instance, there is massive loss of habitat due to systematical use of neoliberal development models, but geographically isolated events such as land grabs to poisoning of land or of water due to mining and construction also take place in these developing parts of the world. So all of these non-sustainable methods of mining, non-sustainable agriculture creates problems as well. Let's talk about Syria, a much debated case. Have you heard about discussion on Syria, the Syrian Civil War and the environmental effects on it? It's very highly debated. And some say it is the reason. Some say, come on, don't be ridiculous. It may have contributed, but it's not the reason. And that's always going to be the nature of discussion with environmental drivers because they're hard to show. That's why we're doing our best to merge geographical data on temperature increases, on precipitation levels into this. And precipitation increase, that does not necessarily mean it's going to, or decrease, is going to have a certain effect. Again, I want to bring back in resilience. If you are in a resilient city, if you have forests around your city, around your farmlands that soak all this extra rain, or some methods for collecting this water and saving for later, then it may not have such a big impact. But the deforestation process is really helping this precipitation, this imbalanced precipitation because of global warming to turn into floods, which then affects habitability. So let's go to the Syrian Civil War, again, resulting in hundreds of thousands of fatalities and millions of people being both internally and externally displaced. The Syrian Civil War started in March 2011 and still ongoing, and it constitutes a human tragedy. Turkey is the #1 refugee hosting country in the world in the aftermath of the Civil War. And, but this also resulted in a vivid debate among scholars with attempts to understand the impact of the structural determinants in addition to the main drivers of political oppression and environmental drivers as well. So some scholars in the literature have said that economic drivers such as neoliberal policies of Assad regime, rising property and unemployment are important in addition to political oppression. And others said political factors, environmental climate factors, particularly the 2006 to 2009 drought in the Fertile Crescents, is very important. So how is this important? What was the causal path drawn for the impact of this drought? First, through increasing agricultural prices, the drought created a massive loss in agricultural livelihoods and rising poverty and unemployment. Makes sense. In conjunction with Assad's policies of eliminating agricultural subsidies, here we have Anthropocene, right? Others which led to depletion of groundwater, a major source of irrigation in the absence of precipitation took place. That's Kelly et al. 2015 article, the much, grilled, debated. And another path is the one through conflict. So we had the economic path for climate, right? Now we have the conflict path. This drought triggered internal migration to Aleppo, Damascus, Daraa, Hama, and Homs, intensifying existing grievances and facilitating the onset of protests and the subsequent civil war. So here, regarding the links between drought and the loss of livelihoods, all available studies agree that a number of political economic factors increase vulnerability to drought and undermine livelihoods, especially in the Northeastern Asia. Anthropocenic processes are also argued to have a threat multiplier effect with mismanagement and overexploitation of local groundwater resources, desertification due to overgrazing, the liberalization of the agricultural sector in the 2000s, the removal of fuel and fertilizer subsidies in 2008 and 9, as well as inadequate and unequally distributed drought relief. Here we have resilience. Still, connecting loss of livelihoods as a result of this process to migration is something that has not fully established. There is a big other side of the literature which says, when looking at the impact of climate change on migration in Syria, the same drought has affected many areas, many other countries in the region, but there are no studies of that. So it's not, the counterfactuals are not established well. Contemplating but not illustrating the impact of drought on conflict and displacement is an issue. So you need to show that, say, these people who migrated to Homs or Dara are the ones instigating conflict there. We don't have that link either. It's not easy to establish. So such studies, you know, have, for instance, there's a large statistical analysis that looks at this effect. For instance, ABLE looks at the existing causal relations between climate conflict and migration simultaneously, and actually comparing the different regions. And the results indicate that there is no empirical evidence backing the existence of a robust link between climate shocks, conflict, and asylum seeking for the period from 2006 to 2015, except for the period 2010 and 12, where global refugee flows dynamics were dominated by asylum seekers originating from Syria and countries affected by Arab Spring, as well as flows related to war episodes in sub-Saharan Africa. So again, it depends on the region. So we go back to the same answer that we give when we're stuck, that is, it depends. Now, what to do in the wake of all of this? There are multiple drivers of migration, and climate change interacts with most of them in driving further migration, that's for sure. Part of it is internal, part of it is external. There are important, I'd like to name two important institutions in relation to that are formed in relation to, as a response to climate change. One of them is United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, 3 Cs. It's an international environmental treaty addressing climate change, negotiated and signed by 154 states. So that's a then United Nations framework, and this is it seeks for the stabilization of greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere at a level that would prevent dangerous anthropogenic human-induced interference with the Earth's climate system. And Turkey is a signatory of this as well. There is a big debate on Paris Convention, also with similar goals, but more ambitious goals also kept in mind. But the good thing about the UNFCCC is it has been very responsive to the academic work in the area. So climate change and migration is one area where academic work is very closely connected to policy through these important institutions. Another one is C40. I did talk about the local resilience, right? So resilience is an important factor to make sure that we are prepared, we have the high capacity when disasters hit, or when we are when we encounter the negative impacts of climate change. So the C40 is a group of cities, and I emphasize cities because they say cities are very important because they are small, but they host a high number of people, very high number. Of the big part of the world population lives in the cities, and C40 cities, Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality is a member of these C40 cities. There are, even though it says 40, there are 97, I believe, cities. And it does try to, with this same awareness of carbon emissions on gas, it tries to connect city officials with their peers around the world to deliver solutions to climate challenges, inspire innovational solutions, advise city peers based on experience with similar projects and policies, influence national and international policy agendas. And in an inclusive way. So here, the people, the migrants, the people who live there, they are all seen as part of the solution, part of the answer. And they try to basically, cities, because they are source of more than 70% of the global energy-related greenhouse gas emissions, and they change the challenge of rapid population growth, their resilience is very important. And this is what this C4 Cities Climate Leadership Group works on. So I think I already took a lot longer than I should. So let me maybe stop here and turn to questions so that they are, we don't leave them unanswered.
Nazlı asked many questions. Maybe
great, thank you, Nazlı.
She asked, how do you see in our daily lives civil society organizations in taking place when it comes to environmental drivers related to migration, globally or regionally? And she also asked, could you share with us any numerical data about social movements on indirect or direct impacts of environment?
Okay, then again, the numbers are challenging because there are maximalist estimations. They say, oh, in 2050, we'll have 1 billion environmental climate migrants. The others say, oh, it's going to be 250 million. It's going to be a lot, and that's for sure. But the numbers are hard to speculate and embrace exactly. And even though I'm someone who works with numbers in this issue area, I find and we all try to make some estimations, some projections, I find it very challenging. But as I said, it's established. Every year, 25 million people move are displaced because of disasters, and a lot more because of climate change. And the thing is, it's a multiplying event. So the people who will be moving because of climate change in 10 years from now will be a lot more than today. So that we can easily say. So what can we do as the civil society?
Yeah.
Well, as a civil society, as I said, the Anthropocenic part of this is very important. What do I mean by this? We hear this fancy word Anthropocene a lot. Some believe that we're now in a new era in the world. From the new era is called Anthropocene era. And my director, Francois, has a good point there. He says, well, what happens if an era ends? Like, then will humanity end by the end of the Anthropocenic era? Thank God we have at least 15,000 years. Usually an era lasts about 15,000 years. But really, it's kind of an overused term, but really, us as humans do contribute to this process a lot. We do contribute to the devastating effects of climate change by making our cities, our towns, our villages more vulnerable to these effects. There are a lot of good documentaries, good films looking at this, how we contribute to this, but deforestation is #1 issue. And I think any effort that is done in that direction, I see somebody mentioned TEMA, I think that's very important, because when the climate change means you'll have imbalanced rains and temperature increases, and you want to be prepared for this. And the best way to prepare for this is having a natural protection around you, and those are the trees. So when you have the trees, you have less floods. When you have trees, you have less droughts. That's the bottom line. But of course, I mean, it's not only planting new trees, but also not cutting them down for mining, like the Saskia Sesson's point about this wild capitalism and non-sustainable capitalism process that these developing countries are going through. Clearly, developing countries are as much entitled to produce, but we also need to learn from the experiences of the developed ones that the mess that they created in the environment is not sustainable, and we should not contribute more to that. So more responsible production processes are definitely important. So encouraging them are important. I mean, there is this whole, again, the mining industry, how to manage it in a sustainable way is a challenge. Is it really worth what you get out from under the earth is worth ruining the earth? You know, there is this debate out there, as you know. I mean, there are so many levels of this, also with water quality, air quality, but high resilience, and also the mega cities is an issue, right? The reason why South and Southeast Asia is mostly affected by disasters, by climate change, is because the high number of people living in the cities. And it's just sustainable for so many people to live in one city. So really, we should be dispersed across space, across land, the way we live in, because all of this living on top of each other increases our vulnerabilities to climate change as well. So those are the first thing that come to my mind in response to Nazlı's question. I'm not a big time ecologist. I'm mostly looking at the migration impact of this issue, but I'm sure there are other dimensions of the issue that we haven't addressed, but those are the first ones that come to my mind. So some, again, also with regards to energy production, that's a highly debated issue. How should we produce energy? Some, like Germans, are a big fan of windmills and other, so windmill is a...
Yeah, actually it is a question here too. Okay.
Oh yeah, okay. So yeah, solar energy. Oh yeah, I see it now. Solar, in Aslıhan's question, solar energy, natural gas, which one is the green energy source? Well, I think this is like when we study Syrian refugees in Turkey, we're criticized for not looking at the root cause. And here, maybe also we should be looking at the civil conflict and how to end the civil conflict, civil war in Syria. And maybe we should also question why we need so much energy as well. I don't know, just to put it out there. Do we really need that to consume that much? Do we need to use that much energy? I don't mean like the energy, the lights that we use at home or the electrical appliances we use, but I'm talking about the high consumption of energy used for production, which is prepared so that we can consume more. So the price of this sweater is not just I don't know, the work that is put, the labor that's put into it, and the, I don't know, the ingredient materials, fabrics, etc. But also energy. And we rarely calculate this, and we rarely calculate the environmental impact of the energy. So by buying this, now I'm guilty, I feel guilty, I'm actually contributing to climate change in a way. So especially if this is something I don't need, if it's something that I want to buy to have a third red sweater in a row. So I think we need to go down to that first. But of course, there are more sustainable ways of producing energy than others. There is the big debate on nuclear energy. The problem with nuclear energy is what to do with it after you're done with it. And it's so costly and so risky that, you know, it's not seen as the perfect source of energy anymore. But still, we know that many of the countries in the industrial world, take France, for instance, uses it heavily, right? So, but now not anymore. every way of energy production somehow destructs with the environment. There is no way we can, some do it more than the others, some do it less than the others. Yes, using sun and wind, the natural factors, calculating them into our energy production is a lot better than others. We can say this, but the bottom line is I think we should just consume less.
Stella asked, do you believe climate refugees should be included in the 1951 Geneva Convention or any other additional protocol?
It's a big debate. I don't know. I have not made my mind about this. What do you think? Do you think that it should be included?
Stella, maybe you can answer.
You're asking me?
Yeah, I don't know if you asked the question.
I think it is really challenging to, you know, differentiate environmental refugees and include them into the convention, but there might be an additional protocol on, or at least more recognition. I don't know.
Some people claim that there should be another one. There should be, because the impact is so difficult to establish, and because we should not be stuck with this, you know, dichotomy of voluntary versus forced. We should have a different convention where people that migrate because of environment should be protected in a different way. That's some claim. Others, I think I am more to that side because I would like more people to be included in this. Otherwise, currently the only way someone who migrates because of environment to get protection under Geneva Convention is if that environmental degradation triggered conflict, and if that person can show he is displaced or she is displaced because of conflict. And I really don't think as a political fact that the countries would be willing to take environment into this because of these difficulties of establishing what is I mean, already with conflict, they're having so much difficulty establishing who's a refugee and who's not. With environment, this would be even more challenging, and the numbers are so much higher. So how would you do? I mean, remember the earthquake in the Caribbean and I believe in the Dominican Republic, and you had a lot of migrants to the United States, and Obama gave them a special status, a temporary protection status as a matter of the fact, and put them in the country and said they are not going to be returned for a very long time, etc. But on the other hand, the governance changed and Trump was like, no, we're going to return them all. So it's difficult. Again, I think it's a great point that we need to do something about these populations because it's happening now. But I'm afraid that the countries will be reluctant to put this into the Geneva definition, which they are already, in fact, as a matter of the fact.
Maybe we can
Haiti, thank you very much. That was Haiti, thank you.
Join this last two
thank
questions. And Emre asked, what is the situation of internal displacement due to environmental reasons within Turkey? And maybe we can link to Aysu's question. Which international organizations send help to environmental climate migrants?
Okay, so that's a great question with regards to where to look at in Turkey. And I actually was going to talk about this and I forgot. Thanks for bringing it up. First of all, we are a destination for migrants, environment-induced, climate-induced migration, as I mentioned earlier. And there's a debate on Syria. There is no debate on Afghani drought of 2018. And same with, I mean, there is internal migration within Iran because of climate change from Khuzestan area to the others. And also because of the Anthropocene, this is the area where most of the oil production is done, the air is completely dirty, and you have a lot of health issues of these people together with the climate change, together with the increasing temperatures. The most susceptible areas of a country to climate change are the dry lands and the seaside, the shores. So if you're buying property, buy them up on the mountains, buy the seaside, but up on the mountains, okay? Not at the seaside. So, kafamızdaki bir Ege köyü, Ege sahil kasabasını bir daha gözden geçirelim isterseniz bu konuşmanın üstüne. Biraz daha şöyle yükseklere çıkma, Assos falana doğru şöyle çıkalım, Kaz Dağları. So the southeastern Turkey is definitely an area susceptible to climate change. We are seeing the impacts of this already in this area. We are hearing about it from the agricultural production. Again, maintaining the water resources during the dry seasons is very important to maintain the livelihoods of the people who live in those areas. But that has been also the reason for a lot of migrations historically. That's why we had all of these big dam projects to keep water resources and for irrigation, right? So already it's there. Already we had internal migration because of droughts in southeastern Turkey. Potentially external too, we don't exactly know. But we do have also incoming environmental migration into our country. So in this case, resilience should be increased in those areas predominantly, and especially those areas that did receive southeastern Turkey already susceptible to climate change, and now they received more populations and the cities have gotten bigger. Kilis has more Syrian refugees than the Turkish citizens or the host community, let's put it this way. You have more very important population increase in Şanlıurfa, Gaziantep, Adana. All of these areas are susceptible to climate change and droughts potentially. If it happened just in the south of the border, why wouldn't it happen just the north of the border? I mean, it's just right there. But also, yeah, the sea level rises. Clearly, they'll have an impact on Turkey just like any other country, but they do have a bigger impact on islands because islands disappear because of the sea level rises. And that's the main challenge. And if you're an island country, island state, your state disappears. And we know what to do when, let's say, Czech Republic and Slovakia split, and there are two countries as to the international law, but we don't know what to do if the country has no territory all of a sudden. So, our country will not disappear, but the habitable areas will shrink for sure, and we should be prepared for that, both to adapt to this, but also mitigate this by taking sufficient action, or we could be climate migrants ourselves. Yeah, what a dim picture I am ending with. Let's have a cheerful question. Is there a cheerful question from the crowd? Now, when the cat needs to meow, he's not meowing, he's sleeping, as you can see, to cheer us up. No. Climate Refugees diye Gaye'nin bir STK'sı varmış. O bize söylüyor. Geniş kitleye ulaşan bir STK olduğunu ifade etmiş. Bir uluslararası kurumlar sorusu vardı. Yani IOM'in bu konuda çalışmaları var ama az önce de belirttiğim UNFCCC en önemli kurumlardan biri bu alanda faaliyet gösteren ve ona bağlı bir takım kuruluşlar var. Tabii ki yani yerel kuruluşlarımız, STK'larımız iklim değişikliği odaklı mevcut. What is did I answer this question? Civil society on displacement. How do you see our daily?
Yeah,
I did answer that.
Okay. maybe I can ask a final question and we can...
Cheerful one, Eray, I hope.
You asked, you said like sea level rise will be important for islands. And what do you think of Southeast Asia region and the role of Japan or Australia in the future for hosting countries?
Well, yeah, I'm not very hopeful about Australia. If you have been following what's going on with Australia, with all the migration and for the way they treat asylum seekers in offshore islands under very poor conditions. Have you heard of the term lip sewing?
No.
It's horrible. Yeah, let's make the day even better by getting into this. So they're asylum seekers that are stuck in those offshore islands of Australia in so-called camps, which are slightly better than prisons, live in such poor conditions for such long time, years, like 4 years, 5 years, etc. They occasionally stage protests, and one of their methods of protest is horrible. They harm their own bodies by sewing their lips. Like it's a hunger strike, but at the same time, it's like nobody listens to me anyhow, so let me sew my lips to make a statement. Those are, I mean, dramatic visuals. If you want to Google them, I'm not sharing it with you. If you want to self-torture yourself right at the eve of the new year, be my guest. But really, the reason why I'm talking about this, Australia, as it is not really very progressive with its refugee acceptance. Let's put it this way. And then, once you're in, integration is rather smooth, but it's very difficult to be in. And but at the same time, they are the countries to be affected in the immediate future from these events in Papua New Guinea, Palau, Micronesia, Tuvalu, Samoa, Fiji, Vanuatu, Cook Islands, Kiribati. They're right by, I mean, especially Vanuatu, Fiji, they're right by Australia. So the first Australia and New Zealand will be the first places that these people will go to. And they, as you said, these countries should be very actively involved in increasing resilience of these island states to climate change. Otherwise, they'll be subject to the results, to the implications of this. Are they doing it? I doubt it. There could be some development aid directed to these countries, but I don't know of anything systematic. There could be some relief, like when there's a disaster, there could be some relief aid, but I'm not sure. And again, I mean, it's the way migration is seen in the Western world is like, oh, it's a horrible thing. Well, for these people, migration is adaptation. They adapt through migrating. Either they migrate as a family or someone in the family migrates elsewhere to diversify the resources of income through remittances. And these remittances are good economically, financially, but they're also good socially. You know, they bring knowledge, they bring new cultures, new lifestyles. So there are, again, on both sides of the shore, in this case in Australia from the South Pacific, there are different preferences. So for the people who live there, yeah, migration is not ideal, but it's an adaptation. You send someone from the family off to diversify your income because you cannot be doing fishing anymore. You cannot be doing farming anymore. So sorry, that's gonna happen. So rather than rejecting it altogether, I think countries should come together for managing migration, not increasing border controls. This is going to happen. At least make sure that you manage the way these people come, you register them, you direct them to the right places, etc. I mean, I don't know how much longer they can turn a blind eye on this.
Sorry for the negative question.
Yeah, I know. It was me who came up with the lip sewing. So.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us today. It was a very insightful and joyful talk. Thank you for your presence.
My pleasure. Is there anyone who'd like to add something? I see some familiar names among us too. Or any other questions? Are we good?
I have one question about that. At the end of today, the environmental migration crisis highly affected the Western countries, but why they don't try to do something to try to, how can I say that, to prevent the situation?
There is some, it's not like nobody is doing nothing. I mean, the creation of UNFCCC and the work that is being done through them and a lot of development agencies, like, for instance, you may know GIZ, they have a lot of job ads, right? So you may have applied for one of them. GIZ in Turkey is in Turkey since 1950s, I think. So this is a German Economic Development Agency. And they are, for instance, very active in promoting this concept called integrated urban development. And integrated urban development is really prioritizing draws our attention to the interconnectedness between the different services of, say, municipalities, for instance. You know, your service in waste collection may have an impact on the environment, which may lead to migration, which may lead to loss of income. Or you may invest in a vocational course in the production of something, which may, with a process, this particular production process may pollute your environment or lead to climate change, etc. You know, or is not sustainable. So trying to see the interlinkages between environment, development, population growth in a sustainable way. So this is an example that, I mean, they're trying to raise awareness on the issue. They're helping out municipalities across the world, cities across the world to deal with these issues. There are, again, the C40 is a great network where countries interchange their experiences and share how they deal with particular issues. I mean, even simple waste management is such an important dimension of this, because it can both, you're cleaning, but you could be at the same time polluting, and how you manage the industrial waste is important. Don't just think about our household waste, right? Whether or not we separate the recyclable from the non-recyclable. No, it's beyond that. How do you deal with industrial waste? What are the requirements on that? So all of this are really a package. Or the water, access to water issues, pricing of the water, the quality of the water pipes. I don't know, like there is for instance, I'm not gonna name and shame, but there was this project funded by an international organization in a big refugee hosting city in Turkey, which was teaching Syrian refugees to produce shoes, in the shoe production in this particular area, in a factory, whatever. But this factory, first of all, because of this, many of the local producers did suffer because it created unfair competition. But on the other hand, this particular facility was very bad on the environment, and they polluted the environment heavily, because the entire leather industry is very problematic. Cleaning the leather, and it's very difficult to do it in an environmentally friendly way, etc. So and the municipality was like, oh, we wish we never have gotten into this, because now it has created all these negative externalities that we need to deal with. So next time we're gonna think twice. And all the municipalities around this municipality give them as a bad example. Oh, we're not going to do what they did. Oh, we have to be careful about what they. So this is for instance, something they do. I'm not saying it's enough. You definitely have a point, Erdem, that there needs to be more out there to be done, especially by countries that are the reason for this in the first place, right? Because of their energy use in the past, and that led to their current high development levels by contaminating the whole world. I agree with you, they should do more.
Thank you, Jan. If there is no question, and we will end the recording.
All right. Thank you very much for this lively debate, for your engagements, lots of questions that we received. Please feel free to contact me if you have any questions on this or anything else. And as I said, I have a joint appointment in here at Hugo Observatory in the University of Liège, and so I'm also a associate professor of political science at Tob University of Economics and Technology. We do have a migration studies program, a great one, an interdisciplinary one if you're interested in applying. So see you soon, see you later, take care.
Thank you.